Hello, Professor McQuarrie. My name is Kaylee. I'll be presenting today with Matt and Taylor, and we are covering mythology in the movie The Lighthouse. And essentially, today we're going to be comparing it to the story of Prometheus. And so, to start off, Matt is going to give us some background on the film itself.
To summarize this movie, I would best start it off with saying that two men are struggling to survive on an island with a lighthouse. We get introduced to Ephraim, who is Robert Pattinson's character, and it quickly becomes apparent that he is quarreling with William Dafoe's character. And as we progress very quickly through the movie, it is found that Dafoe's character Thomas is very protective of the light of the lighthouse and will not let Ephraim do anything but kind of meaningless, somewhat tedious chores throughout the day and keeps the lighthouse away from him. So as time passes, Ephraim gets more curious and goes up to the lighthouse and has a sight, I guess you could call it, where he sees a tentacle-like creature in the lighthouse with Thomas. Now, it was kind of a sexual kind of scene, so you can take that as you will. If you want to go deeper into it, say that the light created the tension between Thomas and the sea creatures, or calls the sea creatures to him. We will also see a scene with a mermaid, see a scene with a decapitated head, and of course the seagulls. The seagulls throughout the whole movie are the biggest example of what the mythology really goes into this movie. They represent the change of pace as well as the death in the movie. When Ephraim kills the seagull, which is against Thomas's wishes, everything changes. The storm gets too rough. They can't get off the island. Their food is depleted. It becomes miserable for him. The only way he can escape is by drinking anything that will get him drunk enough to not realize how terrible his life is. And it all ends with him being eaten by seagulls. And really is just kind of a dark path that leads him down from needing a job to going through the trials of having been a murderer at one point to disgracing the seagull to all these kind of thoughts and views of sea creatures and mystical beings that end up with his death at the end of the movie.
So, I am here to give you a little bit of insight into the myth inside the movie. So, first, we kind of have to establish who is who. So, the person's Proteus is the equivalent of Thomas Wake, Defoe's character, and then Prometheus is the equivalent of Ephraim Winslow, who is Pattinson's character. So, this movie is really just a loose depiction of the myth where the lighthouse's light is the equivalent of fire from the original myth. So, in the original myth, Prometheus, he stole fire from the gods and then was punished by being chained to a rock where an eagle would essentially circle and pick at his organs for eternity. So, some background into the characters themselves. First off, we're going to go with Proteus. So, Proteus was a sea god, and he was the son of Oceanus and Tethys. Therefore, he was a subject of Poseidon. And Homer often referred to him as the herdsman of sea monsters and sea animals. And in order to meet with him, it was required that you must first surprise and capture him, which actually works really well because Prometheus was a very well-known trickster amongst the gods, and so it was actually very easy for them to kind of meet with one another. So Proteus was actually also said to know the past, the present, and the future, and then a word that's derived from that, protean, which means changeable in shape or form, actually derived from Proteus. So essentially Proteus is kind of this equivalent to Defoe's character because he's a little bit higher in rank, he's a little bit domineering, he has more control than Prometheus, and you kind of see that play out in the film a lot because Defoe's character is in charge of Pattinson's character, and Pattinson's character is just kind of his flunky, and he kind of does all the crappy chores that no one wants to do around the lighthouse, while also not being able to go up and see the light itself. So then the background of the myth for Prometheus, he was a notorious trickster and also the god of fire. And so basically Zeus forbade him to give the humans fire and bring it to Earth, so he did just that. And as his punishment, Zeus had him nailed to a mountain and sent an eagle to eat his innards for eternity. Actually, his liver would constantly replenish itself, leaving him in this kind of endless cycle. And then Prometheus is actually derived from the Greek prefix pro, which means before, and the verb manthano, which means to learn or be increased with knowledge. And that's actually essentially what he was doing when he was giving the humans fire, right? Because it is this tool for survival in a very big way. And now I'm handing it over to Taylor to give you some extra mythology information.
So Prometheus is the creator of mankind, and naturally he becomes the archetype of the god who helps mankind. And I think it's very useful to understand Prometheus as an archetype and to keep in mind the patterns of archetypal motifs that emerge in so many different mythologies. When you put them side by side, it's very easy to see the connections and to see the parallels. And so we have Prometheus in Greco-Roman mythology, and he must deceive Zeus, and he becomes this supreme trickster. And Zeus, who has stolen fire away from humans, he doesn't want humans to have access to fire and what that fire could represent. And I think in this case it represents knowledge and truth and light. And so it would make sense for him not to want humans to have that knowledge. But there is the connection between Prometheus and knowledge. His name means forethinker, and he is known for his intellect and his craftsmanship, and he's just a very shifty, tricky character. But he's someone who helps mankind, and this is something that we see kind of emerge in different mythologies. So one variation of the helper god or the Promethean myth comes from Hittite mythology, and it involves the myth of the helper god Tilipinu and the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl. And in this myth, just like Prometheus, he incurs the wrath of the supreme being himself. And Prometheus and Tilipinu, they are very different. Tilipinu is likely to have been the patron of farming, and he's even recognized in some myths as a storm god or the embodiment of crops. But I think it is important to see the connection that Tilipinu has to humans through farming and through crops, something that can nourish humans and keeps them alive. So while there are some differences between Prometheus and Tilipinu, they are both helper gods, and the archetype of the helper god serves the same function in both of these myths. So another variation of the Promethean myth comes from Norse mythology, and it involves Loki, who, like Prometheus, is a trickster, and the god Balder. And Balder is the god of light and justice, and he's really beloved in Norse mythology. But he is very much known for his pranks, and they do often get out of hand. In this myth, it involves mistletoe, which is the only thing that can kill Balder, and he is given his most severe punishment for the death of this god. And this same severe punishment is what we see in the Promethean myth, which is one of the primary similarities between the two. In the Promethean myth, the severe punishment was Prometheus was given this immortal liver to be pecked away by crows for eternity. And you see Loki receiving a similar type of severe punishment. But I will say the biggest difference between this myth, the myth of Loki, and the Promethean myth is the kind of motive behind it. Loki doesn't really seem to have the same type of motive and the same connection to humans as some of the other gods that we've been discussing. We don't really know why he pulls these tricks or why he kills Balder. He kind of just does. And so although the myths are kind of similar in the way they pan out, Prometheus and Loki are quite different. Another variation of the helper god, or the Promethean myth, comes from the Adamic myth of the fall of man. And it does seem wild to recognize Lucifer as a helper god, but there are some definite similarities between the stories. So in the story, in the myth, we have Lucifer who deceives Adam and Eve by taking the form of a serpent. So you see this sort of trickery, and you see the same type of deception that Prometheus exhibited. And he encourages them, in the form of a serpent, to betray Yahweh and to consume the fruit that has fallen from the tree of knowledge. And so you see that tie between the light and the fire and the fruit of the tree of knowledge. There is definitely similarities between those two. But he is almost attempting to deliver the knowledge that Yahweh is hiding from Adam and Eve. And his name actually, Lucifer's name actually means light bringing. So you see that parallel between Prometheus and Lucifer.